The day Cora Meadows became the most dangerous woman in Houston, she was shelving used paperbacks in a second-hand bookstore tucked into the hills of Asheville, North Carolina. Nobody in town knew that. To everyone at Blue Ridge Books, she was Della, the quiet, full-figured woman with coffee-brown eyes and a warm, unhurried laugh who could find any title you half-remembered and who seemed to genuinely enjoy the Tuesday rush of retired schoolteachers looking for cozy mysteries. She wore her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She ate her lunch without apology. She breathed. Back in Houston, a man named Sebastian Vance had not slept in 6 weeks. Cora knew that much from Agnes, the old cook who had worked the Vance estate for 11 years and who had risked her own safety to send 3 short texts on a burner phone before going dark. The messages said the same thing, each one a little worse than the last. "He's not eating. He fired Ridley. He's asking about you again." Cora had read the last message standing in the back storeroom of the bookstore, between a box of donated romance novels and a shelf of local hiking guides, and she had felt something she could only describe as a terrible, exhausted satisfaction. She had given Sebastian Vance exactly what he'd asked for. He'd told her she didn't matter, so she'd made herself disappear. The trouble was that Sebastian Vance had never lost anything in his life that he actually wanted back. She had not gone looking for his world. His world had found her. Cora Meadows was 26 years old and from a small town in central Mississippi, where the biggest employer was a chicken processing plant and the biggest ambition most people allowed themselves was a used car that started on the first try. Her mother had cleaned other people's houses for 30 years. A gentle woman with swollen knees and a talent for making a dollar stretch until it screamed. When her mother died during the January that Cora was 22, Cora inherited a $200 bus ticket to Houston, a reference letter from a hospitality agency, and the practical knowledge that most people would overlook a big, quiet woman if she gave them half a chance to. The Vance estate sat behind iron gates on the western edge of the city, 3 acres of imported stone and curated landscaping that announced its owner's wealth with the careful restraint of a man who had grown up poor and now spent aggressively to prove he hadn't. Sebastian Vance was 39, lean and dark-haired, with the posture of someone who had never once been uncertain about walking into a room. He ran 4 legitimate real estate development companies and a charitable foundation that funded youth sports programs in the 3rd Ward. He also controlled the flow of stolen arms through a network stretching from Galveston Bay to the Texas-Mexico border, which was the thing the charitable foundation was designed to make people forget about. Cora's official title was household manager. In practice, she ran everything that kept the estate functioning: staff schedules, vendor contracts, event logistics, catering invoices, the household accounts. She ordered the flowers and kept the maintenance log and made sure the dry cleaning came back before Sebastian needed it. She also, because she was good with numbers, and because the estate's actual accountant was a lazy man who treated the ledgers like a suggestion, spent a significant portion of her time correcting errors in the financial records. For 2 years and 8 months, Sebastian Vance had not learned her last name. She knew this because she'd overheard him tell Ridley, his head of security, to check with the house manager, the heavy one, and because she had heard him describe her to a dinner guest as part of the staff, with the same inflection a person might use to describe a dishwasher. She was not angry about it. Or rather, she had been angry about it, once, for about 3 weeks after she first understood the shape of her situation, and then she'd made a practical decision to stop feeling things that cost her energy without producing results. She did her job. She did it better than anyone who'd held the position before her. She learned the rhythms of the estate, the personalities of the vendors, the preferences of the staff. She also, because she spent long hours alone in the administrative office with access to the household's financial systems, began to understand something much larger than the utility bills and catering invoices she was officially responsible for. Sebastian Vance ran his money through the household accounts, the way you'd run dirty water through a clean filter, carefully, incrementally, assuming no one was paying close enough attention to notice the guest house renovation that had cost 4 times the contractor's actual bid. The event catering invoices from a company that had no commercial kitchen. The charitable donations that corresponded precisely to deposits in an account registered to a shell company in Delaware. Cora noticed all of it. She said nothing. She kept the household accounts clean, and she kept meticulous, private records of everything that wasn't. She told herself she was just watching, that it was professional curiosity, that she wasn't building anything, just observing. She was lying to herself, but it was a comfortable lie, and she had always been good at those. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in October, during a dinner Sebastian hosted for city council members and 2 state senators who were useful to him. Priscilla Dunbar was there. She was always there at these events. Draped somewhere near Sebastian in something architectural and expensive, performing the role of the sophisticated girlfriend. With the ease of someone who'd been practicing since childhood, Priscilla was thin in the way that read as effort, with cheekbones that could cut glass and a voice that always carried just slightly more authority than the situation required. Cora had spent 2 days preparing for that dinner. She had coordinated the caterer, the florist, the valet service, the seating arrangement, the dietary restrictions of 11 guests. She was moving through the dining room, doing a final check, when Priscilla appeared in the doorway with a glass of white wine and looked at her the way a person looks at a parking ticket. "Tell me," Priscilla said, loud enough for the 2 council members nearby to hear, "do the caterers know which fork goes where, or do we need to walk them through it again?" She paused, her eyes moving slowly down Cora's body. "Actually, with all the food coming through this kitchen tonight, maybe you should just stay out of the way. You look like you've been sampling the appetizers since Tuesday." One of the council members laughed. The other looked at his shoes. Cora's face went very still. She looked at Sebastian, who was standing 10 feet away at the bar with a glass of bourbon, close enough to have heard every word. He met her eyes. He looked at her the way you look at a piece of furniture you've gotten used to ignoring. "Cora," he said, and it was the first time she'd heard him use her name in weeks, "go make sure the dessert course is ready." "I already have," she said. "Then find something else to do." He turned back to his guests. "Priscilla, come say hello to the senator." Cora walked out of the dining room with her spine straight and her face composed, and her hands trembling so finely that no one noticed. She sat in the administrative office for 2 hours while the dinner went on without her. She didn't cry. She'd learned not to cry in spaces that belonged to other people. It always felt like leaving something behind that you couldn't afford to lose. Instead, she sat in the dark and thought about the numbers she knew by heart. Account numbers, routing numbers, the dollar amounts attached to things that would destroy Sebastian Vance if they were ever connected to his name in a federal indictment. Later that night, when the estate was quiet and the caterers had gone, and Priscilla's car had pulled out of the driveway, Cora found Sebastian in his study. He was standing at the window with a drink, his jacket off, his posture finally allowing itself the tiredness it never showed in front of other people. "What you let her do tonight was wrong," Cora said from the doorway. He didn't turn around. "You're employed here, Cora, not married to me. You let her humiliate your employee in front of guests. You're sensitive." He finally looked at her, and his face held nothing, no irritation, no apology, not even the particular coldness of a man trying to be cruel. Just absence, the absence of a person who genuinely did not think the moment warranted his attention. I have 43 people who work for me in some capacity. I can't manage every social dynamic. I'm not asking you to manage a social dynamic. I'm asking you to acknowledge that I'm a person. Sebastian turned fully to face her. He looked at her the way a physician looks at a chart, cataloging, categorizing, arriving at a conclusion without emotional investment. You have an excellent job for someone with your background, he said, and his voice was not unkind. That was almost the worst part. There was no cruelty in it, just an honest and complete indifference. You are paid well. You are good at asking for recognition, significance. That's not something I'm offering. I don't owe you that. He set down his glass. You are useful to me, Cora. That's what you are. Don't mistake usefulness for something more personal. It'll only disappoint you. He walked to his desk and opened his laptop, and the conversation was over as far as he was concerned. Cora stood in the doorway for a long moment. She thought about 2 years and 8 months. She thought about her mother's swollen knees. "You're right," she said quietly. He didn't look up. She went back to her room, and somewhere behind her sternum, something locked into place like a bolt sliding home. She spent the next 3 weeks planning. The thing about being useful was that it came with access. Cora had keys to every room in the estate, passwords to every system, vendor contacts for every service the household used. She had the kind of knowledge that accumulates when powerful men decide the woman managing their domestic life is not someone worth being careful around. She had, over 26 months, photographed or digitally copied a significant portion of Sebastian's financial records. Not all of them, not even most, but enough. Enough to establish a pattern, enough to tell a coherent story to someone with subpoena power. She had encrypted those files and uploaded them to a secure server under a name Sebastian had never heard. She had set up a timed release. If she did not log in and reset the clock every 7 days, the files would be forwarded automatically to 2 federal email addresses and an investigative reporter at the Houston Chronicle whose work she had been following for years. She had thought of this originally as a hypothetical, a contingency. Something she built in the back of her mind the way other people collect lottery winnings, not because she expected to use it, but because having it made the situation feel less like a trap. Now she pulled it out of the hypothetical and made it real. She purchased a new identity through a contact she found through a careful chain of referrals. A woman in East Houston who specialized in clean documentation for people who needed to become someone else. Cora Meadows became Adelaide Morrow, called Della. She opened a bank account. She booked a one-way bus ticket to Asheville, North Carolina, a city she'd chosen off a map because it was small enough to disappear in, and large enough that one more round-faced woman with dark hair would not be notable. She left on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the dinner. She did not pack much. A suitcase was evidence of intent. She wore her warmest coat and her most comfortable shoes and walked out through the kitchen entrance at 5:15 in the morning, when the security rotation created a 7-minute gap she had documented carefully over months of quiet observation. She left one thing on Sebastian's desk, a single sheet of paper, the most recent household account summary, completed and filed, every column balanced, every entry accounted for, no note, no explanation, just the work done to the last line. By the time Sebastian Vance walked into his study at 8 o'clock, Adelaide Morrow was already on a Greyhound bus, crossing into Louisiana. What happened next in Houston, Cora learned in pieces. Agnes sent the first message 4 days later. "He thought you were taken. Now he knows you left. Stay where you are." The second came a week after. "He fired Ridley. He's not sleeping. Priscilla came to the gate and he wouldn't let her in." The third, "He came into the kitchen and asked me where you went. I said I didn't know. He stood there for a long time. He looked like a man who opened a door and found the room gone. Then Agnes went silent and Cora didn't blame her. From a Houston business blog she checked on the library computer, Cora assembled the broader picture. 3 of Sebastian's development projects had stalled. The administrative throughput that kept his legitimate financial machinery functioning had apparently not been as easy to replace as he'd assumed. The charitable foundation had missed 2 filing deadlines. A city council member who had been a reliable vote withdrew from a contract negotiation with no explanation, which in Houston's particular political ecosystem signaled that someone had gotten nervous about proximity to chaos. And Sebastian Vance, who had ruled his corner of the city for 15 years with the methodical discipline of a man who understood that chaos was the enemy of power, had apparently lost his discipline entirely. He had shut down 2 rival operations that had nothing to do with her. He had interrogated associates across 3 networks. He had, according to a business item that read carefully between its lines, parted ways with several long-standing partners amid an internal reorganization, which was a polished way of saying that Sebastian Vance was the absence of anyone else to cut, in the absence of anyone else to cut. He couldn't fathom that she had left by choice. Cora understood that without needing to be told. It was too specific an insult to the story he told himself about what he was and what counted in his world. He thought she had been taken. It took him 10 days to accept that she had simply walked out the kitchen door. And when he accepted it, he didn't stop. He redirected. Asheville in November was cold and pale and smelled like wood smoke and wet leaves, and Cora, Della, she reminded herself, though she was finding the distinction less necessary each week, had built herself something that felt, tentatively, like a life. Blue Ridge Books was run by a woman named Carol who was 63, opinionated about fiction, and who had hired Della on the strength of a 30-minute conversation and a demonstrated ability to alphabetize correctly while talking about something else. The work was quiet and physical in a low-stakes way. Cora's body, which in the Vance estate had been a daily ambient source of shame, too much space, too much visible evidence of appetites that had not been disciplined into submission, was, in this context, simply her body. It carried her through shifts, it fit behind the counter, it moved through the world without commentary. There was a man named Owen Baxter who came in most Saturday mornings, a woodworker who made furniture in a shop 3 blocks down and who had the quality of giving his full attention to whatever was in front of him. He remembered what Cora had recommended the week before. He asked follow-up questions about books he hadn't read yet, genuinely curious about her answers. He lingered at the counter in a way that was clearly not about the books. She didn't know what to do with it. She wasn't ready for it. But she noticed it, and noticing it made her feel something she had forgotten was available to her. She was shelving a donation of old travel guides on a Wednesday afternoon when the bell above the door rang, and she knew before she turned around. The temperature dropped the way it does when someone carries winter in with them. Sebastian Vance looked terrible. That was her first thought. Not fear, not the lurch of recognition she'd expected, but a strange clinical observation. The man standing in the doorway of Blue Ridge Books looked like a version of himself that had been left out in the weather for 3 months. The precision was gone. His coat was expensive, but he wore it like he'd been sleeping in it. He had lost weight she hadn't thought he had to lose, and his face, which she had spent nearly 3 years reading for information she needed to do her job, was rawer and less controlled than she had ever seen it. Through the bookstore's front window, she could see the shapes of 2 black SUVs parked across the street. "The store closes in 10 minutes, she said. Her voice came out steady. She was surprised by that, and then she wasn't. Steadiness had always been her best skill. Cora, he said her name like he'd been rehearsing it, like it cost him something. "My name is Della." He came further into the store. He was looking at her with an intensity she had only ever seen him direct at problems he was in the process of solving. She had never been a problem worth solving before. She had been furniture. 3 months, he said. 91 days. I shut down operations I'd spent years building. I called in favors I cannot replace. I made decisions that cost me more than I have ever lost. He paused. And I would make every single one of them again to be standing in front of you right now. That, Cora said, sounds like a personal problem. His jaw tightened. The door opened and Owen Baxter came in from the cold, a scarf loose around his neck, there to walk her home the way he'd started doing on cold evenings after she'd let slip once that her apartment was 15 minutes uphill. He stopped when he saw Sebastian. He was not a man who scared easily, but he was a man who recognized threat the way animals do, before the conscious mind catches up. "Della," he said carefully, "everything okay?" Sebastian turned toward him with a slowness more dangerous than any sudden movement. Cora stepped between them before Sebastian's hand could move toward his coat. She put her palm flat against his chest and felt the heartbeat underneath, faster than he was allowing his face to show, and looked him directly in the eye. "Don't," she said. "He has nothing to do with this. You bring your violence into my life, and you lose everything. Do you understand me?" Sebastian looked down at her hand on his chest. Something moved through his expression she didn't have a name for. "Owen," she said without looking away from Sebastian, "can you give me a few minutes? I'll be right out." Owen held for a moment. Then, because he was the kind of person who respected other people's judgment, "I'll be outside." The door closed. The bookstore was very quiet. "What do you want, Sebastian?" she said. "I want you to come back." Back to what? He opened his mouth and closed it again. For the first time in the years she had known him, Sebastian Vance could not locate the right words for what he was trying to say. "I treated you as..." He stopped. Started over. "You were the most capable person in my orbit, and I called you the heavy one, because I was too careless to use your name. I let Priscilla say what she said in front of guests, and I sent you out of the room. I told you that you were useful to me, and that you shouldn't mistake it for something more personal." He stopped. "Don't mistake usefulness for something more personal," Cora said quietly. His own words returned. He flinched as if she'd pressed a wound. "I didn't mistake it. I stopped accepting it." His hands dropped to his sides. "I see you now," he said. "Whatever that's worth, I see you." "What you see," she said, "is what was there the whole time. I was worth this much on the first day I walked through your gate. You just never looked." She stepped back, putting the counter between them. "You didn't come here to bring me home. You came because whatever I was doing for your operation, the accounts, the logistics, the particular version of your life that you need functioning around you, you can't rebuild it without knowing what I knew, and it's tearing you apart." Something in his face cracked. It was not dramatic. It was the small, quiet fracture of someone who has been told a true thing they were not prepared for. "Name your terms," he said. The command register was gone. What was underneath it was not something she had heard from him before. "Come back and name what you want. I'll give you anything." "There's nothing to give," she said, simply, evenly. "There's nothing you're offering that I want more than this." She gestured. A small motion that encompassed the bookstore, the mountains outside the window, the life assembled one deliberate piece at a time. You don't get to decide you value something and have that retroactively change what it cost. He stood there with the full weight of his collapsed world on his shoulders. He had come here to retrieve something. He was only now understanding that you cannot retrieve what you never actually held. "There's something else," she said. She reached under the counter and placed a small envelope on the surface between them. "Inside is a login and a reset code," she said. "Every 7 days, someone has to access a server and restart a timer. If I'm unreachable, if something happens to me, if any of your people come within a mile of this town, a package of financial records goes out automatically to 3 places. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, an investigative reporter whose number is already in her phone, and the cartel contact you've been overcharging on the southern route for the past 4 years. Sebastian went very still. That envelope gives you control of the timer, she continued, which means you can go back to Houston and clean up what you've broken and protect what's left. The account stays registered to me. If I ever hear from anyone connected to you, if anyone follows me, approaches Owen, approaches Carol, approaches my father back in Mississippi, I stop resetting it. And I will watch from here. He stared at the envelope. You built this while you were working for me, he said. I built it while you were telling me I was useful, she said, while you were deciding I didn't need a last name. Yes. He picked up the envelope. His hands were steady, but only barely. He looked at her the way he should have looked at her for 2 years and 8 months. Not the blank assessment of someone cataloguing staff, but the specific attention of a man who has just understood that he was outplayed completely, and that the person who did it had been standing in his own house the entire time. I was wrong, he said, about what you were. You were wrong about a lot of things, she said. Go fix what you can. He stood there another moment. Then he did something she had never once seen Sebastian Vance do in all the time she had spent in his orbit. He nodded, simply, without qualification, the nod of one person acknowledging another as an equal. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. Is there anything? Good night, Sebastian. He walked out. The 2 SUVs pulled away from the curb one at a time, and the street was quiet, and the mountains beyond the window were going dark against an indigo sky, and Owen Baxter was on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the first stars. Cora turned off the last of the shop lights. 7 months later, a small package arrived at Blue Ridge Books, addressed to Della with no return address. Inside was a photograph, a plot of cleared land in Houston's 3rd Ward, a construction sign at its edge reading Future Site of the Meadows Community Center. Below the image, in handwriting she recognized from 2 years of household memos. 2 words. I'm trying. She tucked the photograph into the frame of the mirror in the back room. Not because it changed anything. Not because it closed anything that needed closing. Because some things deserve to be witnessed, even from a safe distance. She was 26 years old and 268 pounds, and the most dangerous woman anyone in that city had ever underestimated. She had mountains outside her window and books to shelve, and Owen Baxter waiting on the other side of the front door, who looked at her, had always looked at her, like she was exactly enough. She locked up and walked out into the cold November dark, and she did not look back.